All right, let's go ahead and get this work session started. We had some technical difficulties
You're echoing.
off of someone's computer. Okay. And this evening's work session is for the STR previous original ordinance that we had received from Planning Commission. And this evening, I don't necessarily have a lot of structure to this other than this is going to be a work session for council. I'm not doing public comment this evening because it will be coming back to council on the agenda, and as public hearing, it will also be going to Planning Commission and probably having a work session, or not a work session, but a public hearing with planning potentially. But this evening, I thought maybe we could start with Carol because she was on Planning Commission, and you could just give us a rundown of how Planning Commission came to that ordinance and what the steps were to develop it. And then I know Councilmember Case has notes from what the previous consensus was to do with this ordinance, the original ordinance, and then we'll take up dialogue from there. Mind you, we are several minutes behind in getting the meeting started.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Also, Planning Commissioner Larry Larson is here as well, and what my memory fails to provide, I'll call on Larry to fill in the blanks.
Sure.
But as you recall, in November of 2021, then Planning Commissioner Chair John DeVoe with the Planning Commission had already heard that individuals within the community were concerned about our lack of codification of short-term rentals within the city code. Everyone understood that we had a licensing regime, but we did not have a code per se, nor even a definition within our code. So in January of 2022, the council appointed me to the Planning Commission, and I asked if I could represent the Planning Commission and speak with the city manager, Rob Feltz. Rob was our assistant city manager, and Lee Brown, Commissioner Lee Brown, who's also on the Planning Commissioner, just to figure out where we needed to start. It wasn't that any of us had a burning desire to rid the community of short-term rentals or just offer carte blanche of short-term rentals, but more to rectify something that had grown from the popularity of short-term rentals nationwide and certainly within the city limits, and then capture that in our code. If you recall, from that vantage point, the city took great effort to, and I give Grace credit for this wherever Grace is, for community outreach. She set up 2 surveys or a survey online. There were community workshop or community town halls. The survey, I think, garnered over 360 odd individual responses. All of that information was compiled and presented to both the City Council and the Planning Commission in a series of work sessions, which gave us all the impetus of where do you start? So ultimately, the Planning Commission took the input from the effort that the staff had put together, input from those work sessions. And I can't recall if we had 2 or 3 work sessions, but at any rate, really ultimately offered up the kitchen sink ordinance to the City Council. But it wasn't so varied that it didn't address the issues that were brought up primarily in those survey responses. And as well, one-on-one interviews that were conducted by the city staff, primarily with Rob Feltz and Grace Johnson. So the bottom line is really captured in the recitals of the ordinance that we presented to the City Council, with overall objective of 1, defining short-term rentals, 2, codifying it in our code with the ordinance, 3, acknowledging the concerns of the community in as many possible ways as we could within that code, to include caps, potential distance restrictions between short-term rentals, a new planning use table where short-term rentals may or may not be permitted. And that is the bottom line in what we presented to the city council. Larry, do you want to add anything to that? Are you sure? Okay. So I would say that the product that the planning commission provided went a long way in acknowledging the total community's input, not any particular group that may have been against short-term rentals at all, or any group that felt that they were damaging community character. All of those things were certainly considered in our deliberations within the planning commission. And I will have to say that myself and Lee Brown went into this, the beginning with, really a vanilla attitude toward it, although both of us have possibly even had some negative exposures to short-term rentals. I don't understand why if you put a hot tub in someone's backyard, people must take their clothes off to get in it. It just like, anyway. So he and I, tried our best to incorporate the feelings of an entire community, not a single entity, not a single stakeholder group. And what we presented to you, I'll call it the kitchen sink versus the Wild West ordinance. It was an ordinance that we felt had incorporated all of those feelings. Case.
Thanks, Carol. So that public process, I think, was an important component, and it lasted over a period of time, which I think gave a lot of opportunity for folks to give their input. And we even had the roundtables, and I went to several of those and circulated the room and listened to the conversations at the tables. And I thought they were very productive. And there were folks from both sides of the issue having the conversation about how do we talk about this and how do we proceed and move forward. So when the council considered this ordinance, there were conversations, and there were some things that that were talked about and even thought maybe would make this work, and just a few things, minor things to maybe change and address that I'd like to share. I know Hillary and I had conversations about it. Catherine and I had conversations about it. Rusty and I had conversations about it. I've even talked with Carol, since Carol has joined the council again, about it, and said that I would like to share that with you all again. And if you would, I'm going to just talk through the ordinance about those things, and then see if that's a place that we can start to send it back to Planning Commission for consideration and massaging and public hearing, and start that again. So the first one that I'd like to bring up is in section 5.2.020, which is on page 3, item G, which is the established cap language. And it's 3. And it's item G, established cap. And in that language, one of the things that we proposed or talked about was having the number of short-term rentals as they exist. Back then it was today, but we can talk about today since it's not the same day. For a calculation of that percentage to start with a cap rate. That would hold it, and it wouldn't grow. If I remember correctly, that number has even decreased since
I
that
think it
time.
has, and just again, for historical reference, those percentages were based on the percentages of existing licenses in the specific zones.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Carol. And so with that number, and of course, we always end up with decimal places, and so I would suggest that we round that up and those be the cap percentages as we move forward. The next item.
Kelly, can I go back though?
Yes.
So do you want to keep those caps the same or suggest another number?
Well, I'd like to know the number today, and
Okay.
and divided by the total number of residential in our community.
So
And
just update it.
recalculate, update that percentage based on what the circumstances are as of today.
You
Does
have
that make
three-
sense?
Yeah, you've got 3 members of the planning commission here. Just want to make sure.
Good, thank you for being here. That's helpful. So that was that item. The next one that I wanted to talk about was item K in that same section, which is on page 4 towards the top. And interestingly enough, through the discussion since then, we have, I think, come to the conclusion that accessory dwelling units really are part of a primary residence typically, of a residential property here in town. I'd like to see that accessory dwelling units be stricken
Okay.
from the items that are shall not operate as short-term rentals and allow for ADUs. That was a conversation that we had before as well. The next item on the list is L, right below that. And we had talked about just striking the distance requirements in its entirety. That language also shows up on page 8 under section 18.78.050. Number 8 there on page 8. Same language. So there would be 2 places.
And again, for historical context, when the Plan Commission did the public hearing for this ordinance, we did talk about the challenges of using those physical distances as a means of dispersing short-term rentals. I personally did not support it because I believe the topography of Woodland Park is just, it's not conducive to that. Our lot sizes are, if you go to the older sections of town, tiny little lots. And it seemed like this would limit some of the existing short-term rentals that are already licensed in like Preacher's Row, for instance.
Yes.
But again, it went back to from the input we got from the public in that they wanted a way to somehow limit short-term rentals, and that was a means of limiting them. So that's
And
why
not
that was
clustering, to
correct.
kind of address the clustering.
Correct. So again, if that's our guidance to the Planning Commission, I'm good with that as well, but I just wanted to help understand why we did that.
Thank you, Carol. Then item N in that same section, same page. Just that seems to kind of nitpick a certain group of persons. It seems that would not be very positive towards a level playing field for all STRs. I would like a consideration of possibly removing that language as well. As in Nancy, right above section 5.22.030 where it begins. Okay. Then on page 5, item under 5.22.030, item C, 4 and 5. We had no more than one violation for a violation and revocation of a license. And it does not talk about the length of the revocation. So I would suggest that be, instead of 1, be 2, and that the revocation be for a term of 2 years. And the violation would be a cited violation.
Can you explain cited, meaning that they could be
Ticketed
ticketed? Okay.
for a violation of code. And then on page 7, let's see, again, under section 18.78.050, item B2. Again, it cites that accessory dwelling units would not be not permitted, so remove that language there again. It's kind of the same language as we mentioned before. And finally, I already mentioned on page 8, number 8 above section 7 be stricken because that mentions that distance limitation as well. And then there's language in section 7, the last sentence beginning with provided a current and valid business license holder operating a short-term rental business applies for a short-term rental business license application within 2 months of the effective date of this ordinance. The distance restrictions, it talks about that again. So really that doesn't apply if we strike the other language regarding distance requirements. So that sentence would not be relevant any longer if that's agreeable to the council. That's all I have. Those were the items that we had discussed. And I wanted to just bring those back to the council and see if we have consensus with clear, we've been asked for clear direction to the planning commission so they can be effective in their deliberation. Thank you, council.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just move down the line then with Councilmember Neal. Do you have anything you'd like to add or discuss? And just if council can be mindful of our time too this evening, please.
I guess, again, I've listened to what we had done the last time around. I'm conscious of what we had voted on the last time, 1431, when we made some of the changes. And I'm trying to find a compromise. I've listened to what the group that tried to stop it successfully. So I have spent a lot of time reading their newest version of what they propose. So I could try to, in my mind, find places where I felt comfortable, where there might be some wiggle room. I think the biggest thing that had everybody upset and got all the signatures is we had gone uncapped. The use of the words unregulated was used, but it was highly regulated. It was uncapped. And I was not eager for that one because I didn't think it would bode well. But it did get the 5 votes, so we could at least have a mark in the sand that we could then collect data from the different studies to hopefully start putting in and coming down. I think the first attempt, it didn't get the number of votes required, 1431, started here with the assumption that we would tweak up or down. The Wild West was nothing, and then it was always going to come down, but it gives the perception of Wild West. So when I look at the numbers I'm comfortable with. I'm very comfortable with capping, rounding up, rounding down. The guidance that I'm going to try to cast my vote is something that Jeff Wilson, because I kept trying to understand lawsuits and stuff, this, that, and the other. Is this a regulatory taking? Could be argued, may win, may not. Detrimental, reliant, all the legal things that lawsuits. And what we came to the conclusion with was, I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a judge. I'm looking at this all wrong. I'm not going to look at it from a legal perspective. What I'm going to look at it is, what is morally right? What is morally right to the people that spent money and followed the rules as they existed in the city and invested in the city? So as long as there's some sort of a protection for those that have their STRs right now, and then as long as they follow the rules and get a license every year, they can keep having it. And then they can involuntarily lose it when they start violating nuisance or safety. That's what property rights are all about. You can't have a nuisance and you can't violate somebody else's safety. So those numbers can come down. I'm comfortable lowering the numbers that was proposed, the 484. We had talked about 0 in the multifamily because, I mean, when we were looking at that, we were trying to target attainable housing for multifamily, which is why we brought that to 0 in our discussions. I'm okay coming down with some of the numbers as long as those that have it, they can keep having it until they involuntarily lose it. So there's kind of a moral right. You protect the people that did nothing wrong. So a grandfathering, I'll use that term. The caps, I'm fine with. I want to qualify the ADUs. The ADUs, if you strike it, the primary owner, though, had to live in the residence. It was not just somebody else lived there as a rental and the ADU could be an STR. The primary owner of the house lived there. They could have an ADU that they could supervise. So as long as that was the understanding.
And we could ask the attorney to be sure that that language is incorporated in
And
this
that's fine.
ordinance, if that's what you like.
Frank, I kind of turned to you on the distance thing because I was thinking about that based on what Catherine, you had provided. I now understand why that distance was put in there is to get it into more of a spread out. So you didn't have the clustering where somebody is surrounded by STRs. And I was trying to be compassionate to that situation. So I would be okay with adding the distance or keeping the suggested distance requirement if that accomplishes spreading them out so that nobody is forced into a whole big group of them. So lower numbers, spreading them out, I'm comfortable with. ADUs with primary, I'm okay. I think, Kelly, we had the 2+ violations. Is that what you were saying? I would go with the one, you get one warning and then you lose it. So it's not a 3-strike rule. It would be a 2-strike. And again, listening to the group that have been talking, the burden should not be on the neighbors to have to do much to get somebody to not be a nuisance. So I'm in favor of one warning, and it's a citation. You're warned. The next time you've lost it, and if it's 2 years, 5 years, forever, I'm going to listen to the citizens. If they say, you know, for a longer period of time, I'm okay with that. They need to police themselves. And I've heard from the STR, the pro STR group, they're willing to police themselves. So I'll give you a chance. You get one warning, and then after that, sorry, you've lost it because the guy next to him has a right to quiet enjoyment of their property.
Right,
So,
And that's what
I
I
just-
suggested was to.
so that would be.
I just want to
where I'm at.
clarify, a
Mhm.
warning is different than citation. So for the record, it's a citation,
They get a citation, which is the
a ticket. let's say
the
ticket.
guest gets the citation.
Yeah.
The owner gets the warning.
Well, they get the notice.
They get the notice that they've had number one.
Right.
Another guest comes in and they get a citation. That's 2. You're done. You've
Okay.
lost your STR.
Okay.
So 2 citations.
Yeah, I
the
just
owner
wanted to
gets one
clarify
warning.
the language.
Okay, so that's what I'm comfortable with, and I don't want to monopolize it. I'm going to continue to look at numbers. There is a sentence in here that we had in our own 1431 that when I was looking at the petition that's floating around, it caught my eye. I think we should address it because inadvertently, you can't enforce it in all probability, but it turns every single house into a rental unit if you have a visitor from 1 to 30 days, whether you know it or not, because it says or utilized. I think it should have said rented or leased, but it says rented or utilized. And that was in our own 1431. If I have my kids spend the Thanksgiving, my house is a short-term rental dwelling unit. And if I'm not in the cap, I can't get my kids in there. That's clearly not what we intended, but that would be the implications. Also, if you're a rental person, somebody renting, if you wanted to bring a guest, you'd have to bring the owner in to occupy for when I was reviewing it. I don't think that was the intent, even by the other group that's with the citation. So I think whatever they do is that they're up to them, but we need to correct that so we don't inadvertently have something that's not enforceable and it creates a real legal quagmire.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
administratively, the attorneys will clean up the
Well,
language.
and that is in the definition, I think on page 2 of the planning commission's
Yes,
version.
1431 where it says or utilize.
Yeah, so you're suggesting if in fact that's confirmed by our attorney, that word should be rented,
Either
just-
rented or leased. Because if
Okay.
it's utilized, any visitor turns your house into.
okay,
a short-term
I
rental.
think that's clear. Got it.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to Councilmember Zuluaga, give him an opportunity.
Thank you, Mayor. So, Councilmember Harvey, I really like how you've titled this ordinance, the kitchen sink ordinance. I think that sums it up pretty well to me. Some of the points I have is, firstly, you were correct. There was 3, and I'm doing odds here, so give the exact numbers a bit of grace here. 350 odd feedback from the community when we did the community engagement and all that. And that was what we had to work with. That's what part of this kitchen sink ordinance was compiled from. I expressed my concern back at the time that you guys did a great job putting together the kitchen sink, but it was council's job to put direction to it, and we never did until it was way too late. And then this whole thing was rushed through and politics played its hand. But in the meantime, what I see is we have 850 odd of the community members who looked at the kitchen sink ordinance and said, I don't think so, council. So we've got that to face now. So from what I understand legally, this 1431, as much as we want to revisit it here in the work session, is really dead on arrival. It has to go back. And as far as I understand procedurally, is that right, Mayor? That it has to go back to Planning Commission. So
And what-
whatever it is, that-
And true, and the planning commission needs that clarity from us.
correct. And I would-
So if
I-
it means taking out, the fancy faucet in the kitchen sink, then we need to let them know that.
Oh, if that's all it was. So I recall back when we were considering this, that council to a person back in October did not like the caps. None of us liked it. It's like, this isn't work because you're treating things disproportionately. I think for me, legal sequencing is part of what I'm concerned about with this. So yes, okay, it has to go back to planning, but we have a number of members in the community who are actively in the process of doing a petition to the community. And to whatever that looks like, I think they have 90 days or something to do that. What we're doing should, number one, respect that process, but number two, complement it. From what I understand, one thing that in the kitchen sink ordinance that bothers me is that we're mixing Title V and Title 18. So if we could look at dealing with Title V issues, the business licensing part of it, the part that talks about the good neighbor issues, and I think that would be productive use of our time and respectful of what our community is already saying, because our community is talking to us. They've already said, council, for the first time in the history of Woodland Park, we don't agree with you and we don't agree with you so strongly. Here's 850 odd signatures, right? And now they're going to go to the next one and they don't need very many more than that to now make it a ballot issue. So if we spend all of this time and energy trying to recreate something, I did receive, I don't know if you all received a copy, but I did receive a copy from the petitioners of their proposed ordinance. And it's very clean. It's very clean from what I see in terms of what they want to see with it. My concern is once we start doing this, like CAPS is a perfect example of it, parsing it out. We do this person's allowed this person's allowed that. we set our table of uses in place so that we didn't have to treat people unequally. We put our table and uses in place so that if you're a commercial, these are the rules that are required for commercial. If you're residential, these are the rules that are required for residential. And once you start taking private property and a person's personal residence, then you start looking at, and Denver started this already, then you start looking at regulating everything. Denver's starting now to regulate long-term rentals. I don't think that's healthy for a community. At the same time, I don't think it's healthy for a community to have commercial applications in residential neighborhoods for everything that the petitioners are concerned about. It's like they want the safety and a sense of unity and community in what they've got. And we have plenty of space to allow short-term rentals to grow in our commercial areas. We are a niche spot. I agree with that. But I think less government we can have, the better. And the table of uses solves it. To me, the table of uses very simply resolves this. It says that, and they have it laid out in their ordinance. I won't go into the details of it. So I think that we, in my opinion, what we should be sending back to the Planning Commission is dealing with Title V issues and dealing with the good neighbor policy, putting some pieces in place that already takes what we have. We've already created a lot of what the requirements are in our community, what the parking is and all of this. So, really putting together a good neighbor policy is just putting into one document what we already, we're not actually adding more legislation and everything. We're just saying, here's what it is. Come to our community, enjoy what we have. Here's the lay of the land. All of these punitive things about one strike, two strike, all this stuff. Firstly, you're treating whether it's the existing business owners who have what are termed short-term rentals here, you're treating them with a uniqueness. You're saying, okay, you're in, you're lucky, you're in. So anyone else, oh, you're unlucky, you can't come in. That's not treating people with the law in a fair and balanced way, in my opinion. When we put it in terms of what's in our table of uses, it's very clear. This is what you're allowed. This is what you're not allowed. And in respect to the quality of life that we expect in our community, I think the community is telling us pretty clearly. I might be wrong. I might have it totally read wrong. But for us as a council to come up and think that we're going to present something out of the kitchen sink ordinance that's going to be better, I think I've seen some real smart minds in our community work to put together a proposed ordinance that's going to eventually, one way or another, maybe go on the ballot or not. But the pieces that are still missing are Title V. So let's work on that. I don't want to go directly, but the whole moral rights thing, you talk about, to me, it goes back to set the law, set what it is, make it simple, make it clear, and treat people equally. And so I've been an investor for a number of years. It is certainly part of the life of an investor to move with the market and just how it is. And to say, because they invested into our community at a time when we didn't have clear channels and clear guidelines for them, well, now it's pretty clear the community is saying to us, we want you to follow what our table of uses is. We want you to follow what guards our sense of community and our sense of quality of life in our community. So to me, that's the moral obligation that I look at as a compass. And lastly, once you start doing this warning thing of a tenant or a guest versus the owner, that's so unbiblical to me. I am not responsible for the bad behavior that you do. Every person is responsible for their own behavior. So how do you punish somebody who comes into town who is lawless or outside of our laws versus punishing the owner? That to me is, I have a problem with that. I have a problem with the the proper execution of the law on that. So those are my comments on it. I think this should go in the garbage. Some of it has been taken and been used by the folks who are doing the petition. I think we should separate out Title V and ask planning to put some teeth to that.
Well, very quickly, the planning commission has absolutely nothing to do with Title V. They can consider Title 18, but we're in the middle of a code revision, so Title 18 may go away.
You're
Just a
right.
point of
So then
information.
that's right. And so that should go back to the attorneys and to
No,
look at.
it comes back to the council. If that's how you want to
Yeah.
approach it, it comes back to the council.
But still drafting of that would be something that our attorneys would look at, but you still have the
They would
whole.
draft it after we give them direction.
Well, fair comment, yeah. And the whole thing of the good neighbor policies, is that something that would come, that's already come through planning, hasn't it?
No, we didn't.
You didn't touch
No,
that at all?
no, that's us also.
Okay, well, the reason I say it should go so planning is because really what it should do is it should take what we already have codified in our laws in the community and simply put them into one place.
We don't want to conflict.
Well, we want to take what we've already codified and say, this is the policies of Woodland Park. You can't have, 16 RVs on your property. There are certain things that we've already determined in the unfolding of our
So
community.
that's code enforcement. So we already have code enforcement and the good neighbor policy, the purpose of it was going to be to let guests understand the code.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and so that they would abide by it.
So you're saying that council is going to make that determination rather than reviewing it through what is already established in our codes?
No, the good neighbor policy, the purpose of it was to lay out the codes and have the homes provide the rules.
Yeah, on a little laminated sheet or something. Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
So who?
And no
would
one
pull-
has done
who-
that
Who
because
would
we-
pull those codes into a cohesive?
the city, that's how what we would do by making the good neighbor policy
Right.
is we would put the policy together and then it would be provided with each licensee who comes to apply. Then they would get that neighbor policy and they would have to have it available in their rental.
So you're saying we would not codify the good neighbor policy? We would simply present it
No.
as a city part of the
There's-
licensing process or
There's no
something?
reason to codify
Oh.
the code
No, I agree.
that
That- yeah,
already
ex-
exists.
I agree with you.
It's just making guests then aware
Of-
of if you feed the deer, that is illegal. If you feed the bear, that is illegal. If
Correct.
you have noise past 10 PM, that is illegal.
Right.
Because they're new to the community and they may not know. And then that will help enforce the rules because now they have knowledge of them.
Fine,
So-
yeah. So I think the two things that council can viably work with here is Title V and the good neighbor policy.
Okay.
And so to whatever degree that we are involved in the good neighbor policy, or whether it's something that Michael and his staff do, and then bring back to us and go, hey, is this what you're saying? That's, yeah.
Sure.
Okay, very good.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and let Councilmember Nakai.
Okay, so I'm pretty much kind of on the same page as Rusty, so I'm just going to go down. The only comment that I have different would be on the caps. If we go back and analyze the new numbers, I would prefer that if they're higher than what is currently in this one, which at 4%, it stays at the 4%. If it comes in at 3, then I don't have a problem. I just don't want it to go above. Because we'll still have means for the existing people with a license to still have the use.
And the reason why I think that's not a bad suggestion is we still don't have the economic impact or the housing study.
yeah.
Even if the citizens initiative is successful, we can't change anything for 2 years, but we'll have the data back in 2 years that if the numbers then make sense to go lower or bump it up a little, we'll
Yeah,
have
and-
data. So
yeah.
that's not a bad suggestion, Catherine.
And then the only other one was if we went the legacy option, then we wouldn't need the distancing. But if we don't go the legacy option, I prefer to have the density and the distance. Those are the only two that come off of yours.
Well, and always keep in mind that if circumstances change in the future that make this picture look different, council can always reconsider all of this again, if it needs some updating. So it's,
Those are just mine.
And I just, just for information purposes, the city attorneys have mentioned that other cities typically either do a cap or the density. They don't do both typically. And they did say that the density distance one has kind of fallen to be archaic. So I'm not for or against, I'm just saying.
Yeah,
what
I'm
they
just
have
trying to
mentioned.
figure out a way to
So-
reduce the clustered, you
Yeah.
know, where it's clustering. So
Sure.
however,
Okay,
we can figure out a way to do that.
yeah,
Our planning can figure out a way to do that.
So if we have the legacy for, as an example, the smaller lots in the central part of town, and that legacy prevails until they don't continue with their license, and then it reverts to the distance limitations.
And that
So
was
it's kind of a
that was the
grandfathering, and I know we
intent.
don't like
That was the
word.
intent of the last
And that, and
section of the ordinance that the, yes.
Okay. I don't have any heartburn with that either.
okay. Was that all?
that's it. Yeah.
Councilmember Connors?
I have absolutely nothing that would be constructive at this time.
I appreciate that.
And if I may, knowing that we're constrained for time here, I would also recommend that the commission look at in the paragraph, subparagraph G on page 3, that we incorporate a mandatory review of caps. Not
Good.
just wait until somebody complains, that we do a mandatory review. And it may be that we decrease or increase, but
Do you wanna-
build that into the code.
Do you want a time frame for the review? Like every 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years?
I think 2, but that's just very arbitrary. I just pulled that out of my fourth point of contact.
I'm sure the city attorneys may be aware of other cities' review times if they incorporated them. It does make sense to do that, though. Kind of like thinking ahead of sunsets and such.
Yeah.
It's important to do that. Okay. Council, anything further?
Should we ask for consensus and see if we have consensus with those changes mentioned?
Yeah, I just didn't know if there was anything further. And
Oh, thank you.
Robert, if you could keep it brief, what specifically about Title V? Do you have any specifics or just in general?
Well, I would defer to the work that Arnie's done on it, recommending that Title V be the business license. It's
Okay.
specifically the business license, and the business license does not give you the prerogative or permission to conduct a activity in a zone where it's not prohibited, or where it's not allowed.
Okay, I see.
And then so structure the business license. And, it's clear that a $35 business license and an STR business license are not the same.
Mhm.
I mean, it's pretty clear from what Michael said to us in terms of the oversight of it, that would have a different framework to it. So that's basically where I'm going with that.
Okay, I just
Yeah.
wanted some specifics,
Yeah.
so on record, so that we could, if the planning commission needs to look at that, they know what they're looking at. So yeah, if we have consensus for any of these issues, let's, if, Kelly, if you want to go through your lines, and let's ask for consensus on those.
Well,
Um,
I would ask for consensus on my presentation with the amendments that were agreed to by Carol and provided by Carol, agreed to by, what's your name? Catherine and Rusty.
It's the haircut.
Because I have no issue with those modifications to what I presented earlier. And I have them written
Okay.
on this paperwork I can share with staff.
Okay. Well, I think I agree to them as well. So that's 5. So that's consensus for those particular subjects. Where we vary is wanting to know the number for the sake of caps and distancing, I think. And I think staff was still working on collecting that data and,
Yeah, Aaron will be back next week and we'll have that for you, I would imagine, probably by the end of next week. Just
okay,
trying to get the last few stragglers accounted for.
okay,
Thank you.
For the record, I think we're sitting at about 160, 155, 160 if you have dropped
Okay, that's total.
Total.
Okay. And then do we have consensus for what Carol asked for with the review to incorporate the mandatory review? We'll say every 2 years as of
Yes.
now.
I'd give consensus. I'm a thumbs up.
Okay. And then I'm just going council member by council member. Rusty.
My big one is to protect those that currently have them. I just think it is not morally right to take,
So-
could potentially destroy a family with any action that's taken. I think they came in with good, and I hear you, life isn't fair. Well, I think there's a moral fairness in life that should be by a council granted. So those people that came in at a time where they followed the rules, they got theirs, they should not be forced into a financial disaster. Protect them, and I'll go with numbers all over the place. I'll go with all kinds of compromises.
So Rusty, it seems like then in that original, that with the legacy provision, that would accomplish what you're asking.
I will bend with just about everything else other than the legacy.
Okay,
And
Yep.
that, the wording on the legacy paragraph was a bit ambiguous, and if that needs to be
Tweaked.
tweaked, then I would also recommend
Right.
that to the commission.
okay. Is
Where is
that
that?
too vague? Okay. Catherine, you
yeah.
wanted to say something?
No, okay.
Okay. And then with Councilmember Zulawaga, it was considering Title V, not separating STR licenses from business licensing. And you feel that because you feel they're commercial and should only be allowed to operate commercial zones.
Yeah, so talking about consensus, I have zero consensus on taking 1431 out of the trash can and starting again with it. I don't.
1431.
Well, this proposed, what you've got here is all of what went into the ordinance 1431.
It is not even close. This is the original planning commission ordinance that came to us.
Oh, so
Right.
you're just saying, yeah, so no, I,
This is not 1431.
Yeah.
At all.
there's too much in this that I think it's been reworked well in what I see coming from the citizens. I'd like a legal opinion of whether we can proceed with something that while the citizens are proceeding with something. And do we find ourselves going to loggerheads again with the citizens when they're going, hey, we told you we didn't like what you were doing. We have passed this, then what happens to what we work on here
Well,
and bring?
I think you can get a consensus from council to get the advice of the attorneys on that issue, certainly. As
No,
to
no, not
whether,
just- No, no, no.
Well,
On
he
this whole,
wants to
on the
know-
whole thing of us moving forward with,
Right.
with trying to recreate an alternative to 1431 based on this. When we have a very clear working document from those who have put the petition process in place. It's like, okay, let's look at that. Let's have the planning commission look at that. Let's have a look at what we are missing. And that's where I go back to Title V. Let's look at the pieces that aren't in place here. Then let's look at those who oppose to what's going on with the petition and say, okay, what are the pieces that you would like to see? What are the pieces that are unworkable here? And that's really the point where we can find the point of commonality.
sure,
And
but
as
I
far as
think
I
what
can
you'll
see.
find is that the ordinance that the petitioners had put together, then you would need a consensus from council for them to say, yes, we want planning commission to just work with that ordinance to then bring forward to council.
That ordinance is
I'm-
going to the voters. It's not going to
And
planning
it's-
commission.
Yeah,
Well, it's-
Mayor, I want to make it
it-
very clear that 1431 is repealed, it is dead, and it has nothing to do with anything we're discussing this evening. 1431 is not on the table. 1431 was repealed, and we're not even considering it.
Right.
Absolutely at all. This is the original, and I don't want to argue it. I'm making a statement. It's 6:37 and our meeting starts at 6:30. This is not 1437 or.
no, I
31,
forgot. I
whatever
was
it
waiting until
was.
7.
You gotta go to the
But-
bathroom?
This is the original draft ordinance that came from the planning commission.
Right,
And that's where
that
we're
one
starting.
got scrapped for a different one that council member
Yes,
Ott brought.
correct.
And then Ott's got
It's
killed.
repealed and it's
So-
gone.
And I'd also add that I asked the question at the last last council meeting, if in fact we were capable as a council to consider the planning commission's version while there was a citizen initiative going on. And the attorney said, yes.
Yes.
Well, that's fine. It'll draw the line pretty clearly into the community, so. Yeah, so,
Okay.
well, of course it will.
So
Uh,
Karen,
Yeah, it'll,
uh,
yeah, good.
Thank you.
do you feel like you have enough direction?
I feel it's a backdoor.
Thank you.
Councilmember Cases notes that she's got, since it sounds like that covers everything. I've got pretty good notes also,
Okay,
so I think so.
okay. Well, if there's any questions, then, email us.
So for the record, can you tell me who the consensus is that's moving forward on this?
I have.
1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 of you. All right, thank you.
Sure. Okay, so we're done with work session. We're gonna start council. Does anybody need a break? I saw Frank look at me. So, okay, we'll take 5